Welcome to the Tzurba M'Rabanan Hilchot Shabbat Program with Rabbi Shalom Rosner. Tzurba is a revolutionary halacha sefer which guides you through over 300 topics in Jewish law in a unique signature style. In this weekly series specifically, Rabbi Shalom Rosner learns through the Tzurba Hilchot Shabbat volumes, helping us all master the Halachot of Shabbat in just 2 years. Tzurba volumes are available for purchase worldwide on Amazon. And to learn more about Tzurba, or for those in Eretz Yisrael looking to purchase volumes, please head over to tzurbaolami.com. For more information, see the description below. And now, Rabbi Shalom Rosner.
Okay, let's get into the next topic. We are in Tzurba M'Rabanan Hilchot Shabbat, and we're in volume number 22, the Tzurba M'Rabanan, Dr. Harold and Magda Katz volume, all about other different areas of Hilchot Shabbat. We discussed in this volume already about birth on Shabbos, getting ready, during, emergencies. We are in the chapter of emergencies on Shabbos. We discussed already Rahman al-Islan. We'll just say Rahman al-Islan at the beginning of the this year relating to any topic, any issue that we don't want to happen. We spoke about intruders. We spoke about enemy attacks, other types of danger to human life. We spoke about fire and Gram Kibui. So now we get to the second half of that chapter. Page 84 we'll start with, page 84. And this year we'll talk about children in a dangerous situation, trapped children, public hazards, mazik in Rishus Harabim, and finally returning home from a life-saving mission on Shabbos, which is very lamaisa, as we will see. So first of all, on page 84, trapped children. Trapped children. The Gemara in Yuma discusses if children are trapped in a room. If there is a door that's closed, so the Gemara says, Shovro Motzio. So you get the child it's a young child, which we'll see. You don't know what's going on with that child, so you have to break the door. And if somebody acts quickly with alacrity to break the door to get the child out, that's praiseworthy. You don't have to ask permission from a bezdin. Even if you break it in a way that you're breaking it anyways, you're going to break it in a way to you be able to use the boards afterwards. That's okay, because your ikar kavana is to break it. Vitzricha, the Gemara says, you might have thought, Nina ladeles, efshar diyosef b'haigiso, mishabish le ba'amguzi. You might think maybe you should sit on one side and try to, amuse him and keep him interested with nuts or candy some other way. The answer is no. You could break the door and get him out. Again, Rashi says the cases where the child is scared. Hatinok niv'as, Rashi says there in Yuma Daf Pei Daled. Or not just is scared, but can be scared. If it stays, the Rambam in Hilchot Shabbos quotes this as Al Shem Ha'asid. Can be, like we said before, can become sakana. So here, also, if a door is closed and locked in front of a child, you can break the door. Even though you're splitting it in a way that you could reuse, there's a danger. Again, I think the context here is where there's a real danger to a child. If a very young child, a 2-year-old that's in a bathroom and a toilet, just get the door out right away. You don't know what the child's going to do, and there's water there, but if there's, again, depending how old the child is, the Rabbi Yaakov M. did the Mertzia writes that once a child is 6 or 7, then they could probably be calmed. I remember years ago in a camp that I was in, there was a special needs child that got locked into a bathroom door in a bathroom. And it wasn't like 4 or 5. It was like 10 or 14, maybe even a teenager. And they realized it, and they had to get the some repair guy to try to get unlock the door. It was not easy to just break a door down. That's also dangerous to break a door. The person on the other side. So I remember there was an amazing educator in camp that went next to the door and said, "If you hear me, knock twice." And you hear, if you hear me. Right? Do you want to hear a story? And for about 45 minutes, this educator told a story, and every so often, do you like the story? Knock twice. You don't like this part? Knock one. And she spoke to the child, the teenager, until they were able to get a handyman to get the door. So again, it doesn't mean break down the door. Breaking down the door also involves danger. But one has to know by circumstance. If it could be a dangerous situation, if it is, then you break the door. Rabbi Yaakov M. then again says in source 37 in the Merugsia, any child that needs its parent, needs a mother. But if there's a worry of nervousness and anxiety and danger, even if he's older, any type of suffix nefashos, one is allowed to. Again, the breaking the door is a makalkel l'chora, and if it's makal, again, you're doing it for the boards, but If it's an act of makalkel, so it's a durabanan litzara, getting to what's inside. If you can break the door to get to paper plates and to get to food, to get to a child, you could also do that. Shiur Shabbos says as well, not only if the child is locked, but if the child is lost. And obviously there's a danger. Or kadan sha'avad v'ishmakom l'da'aga. Source 38, the Shiur Shabbos. Oh, kadan shenimsa. What if you find a lost child and he's unconsolable and you're nervous about him? You could call the police to try to find the parents. Oh, kadan shenimsa mishotet v'hu nivas. He was wandering and he's scared. Vein derech acheres largio el aidi bakasha me'amishtara. The only way is to ask the mishtara l'chapes as mishpachto, to look for the family. Mutter lahodio akach l'mishtara. You're allowed to call. You're allowed to call go pick up the telephone and call the police to try to figure out what to do with this child. Again, this is all in serious situations where there's no other way to calm the child. And even if there's no danger to life here, the child is just unconsolable. Rav Nebenzahl writes, Yelad katan she'avad va'alul l'fached, and he's scared, he's nervous, and he's hyperventilating. Yish l'chalo Shabbos kedei l'matzo. You can be machal Shabbos to find the parents. Even they're not worried about danger of cars, but still the child needs his parents, and one is allowed to do whatever one can. So that's a lot of what we would do, and how we would act. That's in terms of children and lost children and trapped children. And what about a public hazard? When does this come up? What happens if there's a glass breaks in your kitchen, and now there's glass all over the floor? So, muksa, it's not usable. Right, but if there's a danger, so then that's also included in these dvarim sheish bo mishum sakana. The Gemara in Shabbos, Ravina tells us in source number 40, source Membeis. Ravina. Hilka, coats birshas are there's a thorn, something dangerous in the street. Molicha pachas pachas bi'arba amos. One can move it little by little, stopping within 4 amos. Again, dalad amos birshas rabim is mavir. That's an issa d'oraisa. But if I keep stopping and starting, that's an akira and a hanacha. Akira and a hanacha. Each act is looked at separately. And therefore, at most, it's a durabanan, and therefore you walk with it little by little, stopping. Uba karmelis afilu tuva. In a karmelis, remember, a karmelis is a rishus hayachid da'oraisa, rishus rabim durabanan. So even walking straight, that's only a durabanan, and therefore one can do that. So that's the Gemara. The Gemara says a danger. If there's a thorn, somebody could get hurt on something. We're not talking about life here. We're not talking about pikuach nefesh here. But if the kozer rishus rabim, you could violate it, and this is durabanan. And the Orchos Chaim, one of the great Rishonim, Reb Aaron Halevi says learns from here, that any type of broken shard, even in the house, if it could cause damage, you could violate the durabanan of muksa. Shivrei kelim, says the Orchos Chaim. Eini talan el lasmi amein malachta. That's the ikar adin. If you have a broken kli, you're only allowed to move it where it's still usable from what it used to be used for. If it's not usable, can't move it. The yesh omrim sha'afal b'shin ru'il malacha klal nitalin imhu b'makam anezek. Some say that even if it's not usable at all, if it's in a place where it could damage, it could hurt, one can move it, violate an issa d'rabanan muksa. Kigon ala shulchano be'emsa bayis is on the table. It's in the middle of the house. Mutter lefanosan. Mida dehavia kotes b'karmelis. Like the coats in the karmelis was just a d'rabanan b'makam hezik. So too here, and the Ramah quotes that in Shulchan Aruch in Shin Ches. Says the Ramah on the Siman, where the Shulchan Aruch quotes the Gemara about kalim that broke. Do they have to be usable to what they used to do? What about a new usage? Machlokas Tanaim. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Kol kalim shenishbru afilu b'Shabbos mutar l'tatzol shivreim. If something breaks, you can move the shever as long as it can be used for something. Ubavachi ru'im l'shum malacha. If it's totally not usable, you can't move it. Just a piece of something, a broken piece of kli. But if it breaks in a place where the shard can be mazik, kagon. A piece of glass, you can pick it up directly. None of the tiltable gufa. You can pick it up directly, so people don't get damaged. Again, it's only where there are dangerous shards. The Mishnah Berurah notes, if it's not dangerous, so then it's not going to cause damage. People might trip on it, but it's not going to cause damage. So it's best not to pick them up directly. You can move them. Let's say it's an earthenware shard, not so sharp on the side. It's not a glass shard. So the Mishnah Berurah says on that siman Shinches 43, shal yusku bahen avelim hu shel cheres asel fanosan. If it's not dangerous, then there's no reason to violate the Issa D'Rabbanan Muksa. But if you're a member, only moving muksa biyadayim straight would be the problem. But if one wants to do what's called tiltu begufo, move it with another part of one's body, so then that would be okay. Right, and as a mutter l'schol baraglav, you could kick it to the side, because tiltu begufo, it is mutter. What other dangerous items are there? What if fire we already spoke about? What if there is something on fire? What if there's something on fire? So says the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Mem Beis. What if there's a white hot piece of metal found on the street? That's pretty dangerous. Sometimes one might not even know that it's on fire. It's hot. So pouring water on it, is that any malacha? No. Again, if it was a soft metal and this is hardening it, the Gemara calls that mitzaref. But a regular piece of metal like we have, like when it's boiling hot and you pour water on it, it's not fixing anything. It's metal before, it's metal after. And therefore, Shmuel says, Mechabin gachela shel mateches b'rishos harabim. You're allowed to pour water on it. Bishvil shel yezuka barabim. Avalo gachela shel eitz, but not a gachela shel eitz, not a coal, a wooden coal that's on fire. Why? What's wrong with the wooden coal on fire? You're extinguishing it? What do you mean? But Reb Shimon holds, remember, malacha she'ein tzricha legufa is pater. We spoke about that months ago. Malacha that you're not doing because you want to create an ember to use. You're doing it to put the fire out. So shouldn't that be mutter? So the Gemara says, yeah. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it will be aser. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we pass like Rabbi Shimon, Meikar Adin. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it will be aser. That's why it says lo gachela shel eitz. Rabbi Shimon would allow even gachela shel eitz to be put out. But as we saw in the earlier Shiurim and earlier volumes, the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda against other Rishonim. So even though we paskin me'ikar adin like Rabbi Shimon, that it's derabanan, it's a chamor iser derabanan, because after all, the Rambam holds his daraisa. And that's why if you look in the Shulchan Aruch holds both opinions. Shulchan Aruch is meshubid and kafuf to the Rambam, and Shulchan Aruch says, if there is a coal that's sitting in a place where people can get damage from it, you can put it out. Where there's no kibui, or even if there's wood. Why? Because that motes is an issa d'Rabbanan. The Rambam Oser b'shaleis, the Rambam Aser b'shaleis, because that's a daraisa. Daraisa prevent damage. That's no simple. The Mishnah Berurah says Lamaisa Maker Dewi Paskin Lakula, but if you could figure out some other option or solution, that would be best. Says the Mishnah Berurah there in Shimon Shin Lamed Daled. Yochal Chabosa Umayri, source 46. Shein Lo Eitza Ich Lataltzla Makom Zeh. We're talking about a case where you can't figure out any other option to move it to a different place. Shein Rabin Mitsuyan Ba. It's definitely better not to put it out. After all, the Rambam says it's daraisa. So if there's no other option, so then one can put it out. But according to the Rambam, remember, it's kibud min Torah, and therefore that would be a problem. The Shulchan Aruch Harav says, again, like the Mishnah Berurah, me'ikar adin et mutter, laha omer, l'chshay tzrich legufa, ina srei l'midivrei sofer, mutter l'chabos, afilu gachel shel eitz, even a wooden coal, hamunachas machas rabim nizokin ba, because Chazal weren't gozer. That's how it's formulated. You see in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, sheba makam hezek haguf lo gazru. Right? They weren't gozer the laws of muksa or the laws of issa d'Rabbanan, of gram kibu, of l'chshay tzrich legufa. Right? They weren't gozer in these cases, and therefore they'll be mutter v'afal pikein. Kol bal nefesh yishlach melaso. The bal nefesh should be machmir, says the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Modern day, coal. We don't have too many coals sitting around, earthenware or metal or wood. But what if one has an electric wire that's hanging down? An electric wire, an electric cable fell to the street. It's on the floor, and that's a serious potential pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh. The Shmir Shabbos says, call the electric company. Right? Ask them to cut the power. Call somebody to fix it, whatever it is. We do not make you, and this is a yesod. This is a very important yesod in halacha. What do you mean? Just stand there. Stand there for the rest of Shabbos. And if anybody comes close, tell them they'll come. You don't have to be Mechal Shabbos. You're preventing any danger. Says the Shmir Shabbos in the name of Shlomo Zalman, halacha does not demand you to do that. Halacha says you can live your life. And if the normal way would be to call, you could call. Says the Shmir Shabbos. I have to know how to apply this principle, but this is an important yesod. You have electric lines that fell to the street. You're nervous that somebody might touch them. You could call the electric company. Turn off the flow of electricity. There's no chiyuv to stand there for the rest of Shabbos to warn people. You don't have to do that. What do you mean? You're not being machal Shabbos? It's a different solution. No, but the halacha doesn't look at that as an option that you need to do. You want to? Then you're a super chassid. But not that you have to. And he quotes in the footnote, Shamati me'goner Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Dikamosha matzanu. Shemuta lachabas gachelas. Kalish lizuka borabim. Just like you could put out a gachelas, so too here you can do what you need to do in order to prevent the danger. Shmir Shabbos also says, let's say I could save somebody or save someone else's life by being machal Shabbos or by losing a lot of money or great inconvenience. Then one doesn't have to have that major inconvenience. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman said this shita, even though he says, I know people argue on it, but that's what I hold. That's what I hold. Look at the Mincha Shlomo, in the first volume of the Mincha Shlomo. Chelik Aleph Siman Zayin. You have it there, source 49. He quotes the Shmir Shabbos, but the Shmir Shabbos quoted him. Now he's quoting the Shmir Shabbos. And then he quotes, you're allowed to, let's say, he says, you're allowed to light a candle for a chol sheish bo sakana, even though, you know what, your neighbor has a light on. So you could just bring the chol into the neighbor's house, and he can stay on the couch. But you don't have to do that, and your neighbor doesn't have to do that. Or, what if a chola needs hot food? You could cook him food. What if your neighbor already has food? But you don't have to go. Those can be very inconvenient. What, the chol is going to stay on your neighbor's couch for the rest of Shabbos? So, or it's the middle of the night, and you're going to have to wake him up? Again, if you're very close to each other, and you could just go over, and everybody's up, and they won't mind, okay, but here you don't have to. It's my food. I don't have to give it. So dinim elu huva b'sham b'shmi, says the Shmir Shabbos, these were quoted in my name. Ve'yosha shamati migdolei Torah b'ksavu b'alpeh. And even though I've heard people reacting to my psak and being ma'arer on it, so he says, I stand on my psak. V'anochi ba'ani al mishmarti amoda shekenim heim advarim v'chin roy lahoros. I think it's correct that he quotes it from a Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea by Tumas Kohanim. How much do you have to pay to not be metame? So here too, there are limits. And therefore he says at the end of the tshuva, the end of on page 91 now, the kima shekain gamleini pikuach nefesh is balamei merhachi. The kima shepikuach nefesh docha Shabbos ein zu avera. Pikuach nefesh is docha Shabbos. Ve'eno chayav lafsido klum mishalo. I don't have to give so much money to be able to the other option. Im cholehu beno oishosh chayav lotzi mamon lerfuasam nir shechayav lotzi mamon. If it's his own, it's different than somebody else. Okay. Shmir Shabbos summarizes some of these principles in a nice paragraph. Rabim u'meguvanim heim hamatzavim sheshaz cherem alula lavi ima. Right? Every emergency situation is different. V'yefshar l'chazosa meirosh. And you can never prepare fully for every situation. Yesh davar mesuyam asur lasoso. V'yesh nesivos matiros mechayvos lasoso. Chlal bi'adenu. Sometimes you're not going to know. V'chay bahem. Adam nivra ba'olam hazeh u'motal l'shvar tayig mitzvahs. Our job is to perform tayig mitzvahs. Aval ein ator dereshes menu l'shvar mitzvahs ke'ela. We don't have to do the mitzvahs if it's a danger to life. Adarabba mitzvah adam lavra mitzvah Torah. It's a mitzvah to violate, to live, to save a life, to someone else's life, and therefore, I wanted to keep that in mind. Similarly, if somebody gets a call up to the tzava, to the army on Shabbos, and the same thing, he should follow the same rules of going anywhere else to be B'chal Shabbos, and he's allowed, the Shmir Shabbos Paskins, whatever, unless he's going to go for a week now, he's allowed to take his talis and his tefillin and other personal things that he's going to need, even though you're going outside the tchum, just put it in the bag. Just put it in the bag. He says, Games chafatzava ishiyim shoes akuk lehem, talis, tefillin, sitter, near toilet paper, v'yachniz hakol b'yachar l'toch tarmil, then you can just put it in the car and drive from there and not carry it direct. Okay. The last topic, the important topic for that's left for us to discuss, is returning home. That's the sugya of Chazara b'Shabbat. Right, Chazara b'Shabbat is going home from a life-saving situation. A Hatzalah member takes somebody to the hospital. Does he have to stay there? So if he's in the only ambulance in the neighborhood, so he has to go back because maybe there's a need right now. But let's say there's no other ambulance. There's 10 other ambulances, and he's not going to be needed. Does he have to stay in the hospital for the rest of Shabbos? Right? What is the issue? What about a doctor or a nurse who does shifts? What about other mialdos, midwives? Right? What about a soldier who's called, who wants to go back on, if he has to go do something on Shabbos, some short pu'ulah activity, can he go back after Shabbos? So Chazal recognized that if we just answer everything, there is a concept that people won't go, they'll think twice before going the next time. And therefore, says there are some limitations on the Isurim. Already we find in the Gemara, the question is how far to take them. So the Mishnah tells us in Maseches Eruvin that some people who went out to save lives, even though usually if you go out of your tchum, then you have 4 amos, that's it. But Chazal said 2,000 amos. If you go out of your tchum, you still have a new tchum. Says the Mishnah in Eruvin in the 4th parak, source 52, Mishiyatza Bershus v'amrulo, Farnasa Maisa. He went out Bershus, he went out to save somebody, he went out for Kiddush HaChodesh, whatever it is, Yishlo Pa'amam Alecho Ruach. He has 2,000 amos. He has 2,000 amos. But the Mishnah continues and says something seemingly contradictory. Whoever went to save a life could go back to where they started, where they came from. So the Gemara discusses the stira. The first line says you have a new tchum of 2,000 amos, and the second line says you could go back to wherever you started. So which is it? So the Gemara says in 53, Amar Yehuda Marav, Chozon L'Bchezan Limkoman. No, you could only go back to 2,000 amos. What's the chiddush of Limkoman? You could even bring your weapons back to within your 2,000 amos. Says the Gemara, my kusha, maybe there's no stira. Dilma Lahatzol Shiny. What do you mean? Maybe saving a life is different than any other types of birshus. Birshus is only 2,000 amos, but Lahatzil is even more. So the Gemara says, no, we find Lahatzala, life-saving cases that you're allowed to go back. And then he says, if you're saving, Minamapolis, Minataleka. So the question is, how far do you have to go? So the Gemara has two answers, two approaches to this issue. Number one, as we just said, and the Gemara says it at the end of 53 also, Chozim Mikli Zayin Lim Koman. You read it all together, only up to 2,000 amos. And the chiddush is you could even bring your weapons back. So that's number one. According to that daya, there's not much, there's no heter besides up to 2,000 amos. Number 2, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar, well, maybe it depends. V'lo kasha. Kancha nitzchu Yisrael asumos ha'olam. Kancha nitzchu mos ha'olam es atzman. Did the Jews beat who won the war? If the Jews lost the war, which means there's still an imminent danger, that's when they could go back. If there's still an imminent danger, they can go back to your original place. But if there's no danger now, then you can't. According to this reading, and this is how Rashi reads the Gemara, it seems like there is no, let's say a Hatzalah member or anybody else goes, they can't go back, except 2,000 amos. Or if there's still a danger. And that would be a big limit, and there would not be too many flexibility in the dispensations. But Rav Moshe Feinstein thought that even though that's the Shita, that's the understanding according to Rashi, many other Rishonim explain the Gemara differently. And he quotes Tosfos and the Rashba and others who say, even though this is not listed in Chazal as one of the examples, but it is an example of Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilasan. The Gemara Maseches Beitzah, sometimes we will allow something in the future, because if you don't allow in the future, they won't go the next time. Hitiru Sofan Mishum Tchilasan. If you don't allow them to do it, they won't open it. The Gemara says, Ula, Yud Aleph, Beitzah Yud Aleph has a few examples of this. 54. Shlosh Adar Midir Som Mishum Tchilasan. Or Lefnei Adursan. Right, so you want people to shecht animals on Shabbos to be able to supply for people, for Simchas Yantif. But if people know, if shochtim know that they're going to have to just, their skin, the animal skin is not going to be usable, which is a lot of money, so then they're not going to do it, they're not going to shecht in the first place. There'll be less food for Simchas Yantif. So Chazal said they're allowed to put you're allowed to put the skin on the floor so people could trample on it so it'll get processed. Whatever the case is, that's the principle of Yitir Sofa Mishum Tchilasan. If this is the reason, Tosfos says, this is for the reason, for the Gemara, about the weapons also, Eruvin Memdala, Tosfos, in source 55, then Lamaisa says Rav Moshe, you're allowed to carry the weapons in a Rosh Hashanah on the way back. That means you can even do a Daraisa because of Yitir Sofa Mishum Tchilasan. That's how Rav Moshe understands the Gemara. And therefore, Moshe says, in the case of the Hatzalah workers or the like, if somebody leaves and assumes that they're going to be there for the rest of Shabbos, so then we're not worried that he's not going to leave the next time, knowing that he's going to not be able to come back, because he left knowing that he'll probably be there for the rest of Shabbos. But if somebody is not planning to be, he knows that he's not going to be there for the rest of Shabbos. He knows he's doing a short activity, and then he left to come back. So says Rav Moshe, in those cases, he threw seforim mishum tchilasan even by Yisur Daraisa. That's the Chiddush of Rav Moshe Feinstein, Arachaim, Chelik Daled, Simin Pei. Simin Pei. So he says, Zeh Pashur in the middle of 56. If they're going to need you back when you came from, then for sure it's mutter. For sure it's mutter. Our only question is, there's a different ambulance in the place where you came from. Right? Do you have to be worried? No. There's no issue we're getting back. Says Rav Moshe. The Imu Atzala on the fifth line on the next page, page 98. The Imu Atzala Kizu, Sheyadua Haya, Shu Rak Luzman Katsar. If a guy goes, he knows it's a certain thing that he has to bring somebody to the hospital and then go home. Checking medicine. If you don't let him go back, then he's not going to want to come the next time. And that's Rav Yehuda. And then he says, Avalini Chazar LaBeisam Shu Yoser Me'alafim Talui Imhu Hatzala Kazusha Yisovim Shefshi Yisachal Shasham Yosem Yom HaShabbos. If he assumed that he would have to be there the whole Shabbos, then there's no worry, then he can't come back. But if he was planning to, if he would only be there for a short amount of time, you can matter even a daraisa. That's Rav Moshe's famous shita. We'll make it famous now. Rav Moshe allows even by Yisur daraisa for the Hatzalah guy to drive himself back. But Rabbi Shalom Zalman and many other poskim argue and say, no, the examples in the Gemara are only derabbanans. And therefore, they should not be able to come home. And Rabbi Shalom Zalman says, Misvara, I don't even want to allow to get a guy to drive you home. But you know what, the Chassam Sofer said, that's okay, so I'll allow that. For Rav Shlomo Zalman is not into it, and he even calls, because of those people that might not come the next time, because they are Kalei Hadas, they're light, and they don't take halachas so seriously. We'll get to that. So therefore, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, not allowed. But Rofish Nikra b'Shabbos l'chola, v'chein chachama aboy leleid, v'abal hatzla min adleika. Avagav sheishamal payim amal charuach. Even though there's 2,000 amos, mikol makom gamlim kom ein mutram lachzor. They can't go back if it's more than Chum Shabbos, and surely others lachala. And he says that they're not gonna. I don't believe in the hisrashlus of the tzibur. He says va'av shel tzareinu in the middle. Yesh harbe rofim kaledas alagavi tu hachshashu. There is a chash ms. He says, but I don't think that's good enough. But the Aruch Shabbos and other poskim, as we're about to see, say that maybe Rav Shlomo Zalman, maybe the Metzius was different then, but in our day and age, where very, very often you have doctors that have to go in, you have soldiers, as we'll talk about. They're not just Kalei Das. They're people who take halacha very seriously. And if they get called out by their family over and over and over again, and they're willing to do it. But if they can't come back, they're going to think twice before going the next time. And that's a serious, even not for the Kalei Das. So the Aruch Shabbos says, it could be in our generation, in our door. Maybe Shlomo Zalman's was a little different a couple of decades ago. But says the Aruch Shabbos in 58, Yesh la'ayin ba'ofanim shalafia metzius haniris la'inenu ha'inna. According to what we see today, Yesh shash amiti. There's a real shash. Right, Hatzalah members people might not want to be part of those Hatzalah teams. Right, I want to be a part of Hatzalah that relies on emotion, not Rav Shlomo Zalman. Yishash amiti shem lo yatir lachzor l'mkomam. If you don't allow them to go back, yimanu bepam acheres min aleches. They won't go back the next time. Ukigom bekvutzas anashim osekas bakoshes ezra rishona. Right, people who give first aid. Feim nikram midei pam adi machshir kesher lavola mikrim sheish b'machshash sakan. The Hatzalah people, and if they have to stay there, so then forget it. The Yesh Mosem, he says, Yesh Mosem Hora B'Shem Aron Chazonish. He quotes this from the Chazonish. She'ein le'asal l'rofi anosei b'Shabbos l'zortivo b'chol l'achzor mechoni yuso. B'Shem the Chazonish, it's mutter to go back because they won't want to go on the next time. The Yesh Moran came the Grizmi Brisk. Remember, the Briskers were always very machmir in terms of pikuach nefesh, meaning mekel and allowances. Rabbi Bleich also writes about Hatzalah members. Maybe ideally, they shouldn't drive home, but those who if Hatzalah groups have trouble getting members, if they know this is going to be the policy of the Hatzalah, so then one can be mekel. It's been reported, says Rabbi Blythe, that in some areas Hatzalah has not been able to enlist sufficient members of volunteers willing to participate on Shabbos and Yontif, because wives and family have objected to being deprived of the presence of their husbands and fathers for virtually the entire Shabbos and Yontif. The result is that lives have indeed been lost. Without passing moral and halachic judgment, it may be argued under such circumstances, all agree that it is mutter. Even according to the more mekel approach, do you say this about doctors on call? Not an emergency situation. What about a doctor on call? So again, the best is to have a guy drive back and forth, which some hospitals here in Israel have that arranged. Rav Shechter assumes that you can't rely on the general heter even for a moshav hitiru if you're getting paid for it. Because if you're getting paid, you're really not going to go next time. You're getting paid. So therefore, he doesn't think that the idud of hitiru sofam shem tilasan applies in that case. V'ner Pashut, he writes in source 60, Kol hecha shu achra'i ba'ad beit cholim ba'ad oso Shabbos u'mekabel maskores. If you're going to get a salary, sheri oses malachto ba'ad atzmo ein tzorach al kach idud. And other poskim as well, Rav Asher Weiss, Rav Elasher, Rav Malamed, the Sefer Pua, that paid doctors and nurses may not drive home themselves, though a Gentile, a non-Jewish driver, can be used. One final point relating to not just doctors, but Rav Avihud Schwartz, who's quoted here in this tshuva on page 102. He is the head of the IDF Rabbinate's Department of Jewish Law. He writes, he says, there are many soldiers that are deeply committed to Shabbos, deeply committed to halacha, but they're even if they're compensated for their services, but if they're called on Shabbos to go into the army for 2 hours, if they can't come back, you're going to get less people in it, that they're going to think twice before what they need to do. And he quotes examples. He quotes examples that a few weeks before, somebody called him, a mefaked called him and said his unit was called in, and he wasn't called. And he won't have to go in. But he knows that if he spends 2 hours there and getting him ready for the terrain and getting him ready for the job, it has a much better chance of success. But he doesn't have to go in. But he would go in if he knows he could come back. And he said, that's going to be the nafkamina. I'm not going to go in if I can't come back. So what do you do? And this is somebody who cares about Shabbos, somebody who cares about the halacha. This is not kalei das. So he says, b'mechilas kfod Rav Shlomo Zalman. These are realities that they're not kalei das. They're very shomrei Torah mitzvahs and shomrei. They love Shabbos and they love Israel. So in these cases, he was matir. He says those cases, Yitiru, rely on Ramosha, even in a case where we're getting paid. And even in a case, because that's the Metzias. That's the Metzias. Because if it's clearly danger, they're going to come. But there are gvuli cases. So he says in those cases also, L'chora, he says one would have to be mekel, one would be allowed to be mekel in this case, because it really is a case of saving lives in the bigger picture. Okay, we'll stop here. This takes us through the chapter about emergencies on Shabbos. I'm going to understand the next time we get to the next chapter of electricity on Shabbos.